Bishop Strickland, this is the Advent season now, and I just wanted to ask, before we get to your tweets, to ask you to kind of prep us all up so that this Advent's going to be the best ever. And what should we be doing? What should we be preparing for, and how should we do it?
Well, Terry, it is beginning a new year liturgically, and that's always a good thing to start fresh, to think about how you can really begin this new year in the church's year, the faith journey, the most important new year, really. But certainly, and thankfully in our churches, and I know in a lot of places, their confessions are emphasized and greater opportunity to go to confession. That's a great thing to do as we begin Advent, is to go to confession. And just to really do a sort of a spiritual New Year's resolution and ask yourself how you can live closer to Christ. As we were talking before we started, there is a penitential tone to Advent, not as strong as Lent, but it is the reason we wear purple. It is a penitential time in the sense of really recognizing, as Lent prepares for the glorious resurrection of Christ, Advent prepares for his birth.
Amen. And
so the church in her wisdom tells us to do a little penance, back off from, the usual routines of life, a little penance, pray more, just prepare for that glorious celebration of the birth of the Son of God, the Son of God incarnate among us. And as we've talked about before, it's a great time to reflect on, really, the incarnation begins with the Annunciation, March 25th. So we celebrate the birth of Christ 9 months later on December 25th. And that's what Advent is leading up to. The great coming of the Son of God into the world, Emmanuel. So the season of Advent, preparing for Christmas, the season of Lent, preparing for the resurrection of the Lord, they're very important times to get ourselves ready and to recognize that all that this world has to offer us doesn't ultimately fill that hunger that we have. I would really encourage, especially with all the concerns that we have in the nation and the world, in the church, for really especially to emphasize prayer and fasting during this Advent season. The church doesn't have a lot of requirements of fasting, but you can always make your own decision to maybe, even for Advent, don't eat meat on Fridays. It's not mandated by the church, but to really look at things like that for us individually and for our families, for our parishes, for any group of people that maybe you're a Knight of Columbus, maybe talk to your council about entering into more prayer and fasting during Advent. Maybe you're part of a Rosary Society, whatever aspect of the church that you're a part of, certainly your own family and your own individual prayer life, but prayer and fasting, the Lord tells us that some demons are only conquered by prayer and fasting. And we have to recognize that there are many demons in the world today, the demons of the secular world going off the rails, the demons in the church that are really like what's going on in Germany with the Synod. It's really tragic to see bishops turning away from the truth, that wherever those shepherds lead, it's into darkness. There's no change in the truth. And so Advent is a time to be very clear about that, to be joyful. Once again, for Advent, we have Gaudete Sunday, the third Sunday of Advent. The priest will wear rose-colored vestments, and it's a joyful moment to remember even when we're penitential as disciples of Christ, the joy is never totally gone. It's not, oh, we're facing deep darkness and everything's dark and ugly. That's not the purpose of the penitential season. And those joyful moments at Gaudete and Advent, Laetare and Lent, is a time to let that spark of joy remind us of what we're preparing for, the birth of the Son of God. So I do urge people, and I talk to people all the time, and I'm sure you do as well. And we're human, we're worried, we're concerned.
Yeah.
We get fed up with some of the corruption in the nation, the corruption in the church, the crazy things that get said that aren't based in reality or in the common good, much less in the gospel. It's just a strange and difficult time. So we need a good spiritual Advent more than ever. We just celebrated the Feast of Christ the King and reminded ourselves Jesus Christ is King of the universe. What I tried to say in my homilies on the Feast of Christ the King is to remind people the church didn't make this up. We didn't say, oh, let's come up with an idea. How about this? We'll decide to make Jesus Christ King. We didn't make him anything. The church is simply pointing to the truth. Jesus Christ is King of the universe. He's the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity. And the tone of the things that are said in the church today and in the world, I think it's easy for people to be confused and think, oh, well, we're changing this, we're changing that. We just make things up. That's not how the church operates. The church points to the truth that God has revealed to us. And that's what we really need to remember. So Advent is a time to remember that the King of the universe is being born among us. That's what we celebrate at Christmas. And that always has to be the tone of our celebration. So I urge people to really pray about and think about some acts of penance and prayer and fasting. One thing, the mandates, by the bishop or whomever, really don't seem to be too effective. People do what they want to do. But I urge people, mandated or not, I mean, people thankfully are still free to choose to live Jesus Christ the way they choose to. One thing that I would encourage people to do during Advent, for maybe it's only 4 Sundays, but the 4 Sundays of Advent, consider fasting like we used to. I mean, probably before we were born or just when we were little bitty kids. I didn't go to communion when it was still the rule that you had to fast from midnight.
Either.
But nobody's telling you can't do that. Yeah. And it might be a good, just for the 4 Sundays of Advent in preparation for the joy of Christmas, we can all use, most of us can use a little fasting, but it's not a diet, but it's a reminder that nothing feeds us other than God. A lot of things pretend they do, and we can have wealth, and we can have pleasure, and we can have power, and we can have influence, and we can have this great position. But ultimately, nothing feeds us except our relationship with God, because that's how he made us in his image and likeness. So fasting is about reminding ourselves of that. So I'd encourage anyone who's listening to consider fasting from the midnight. Let's say you go to 10 o'clock Mass in the morning. That's a little bit of a sacrifice, and not have your usual morning coffee, not have the breakfast that you might usually have before you go off to Mass, but make that and just offer that little fasting, that sacrifice for your family, for your own soul to grow closer to the Lord, to be more repentant of sin. Fasting is a good thing. The Lord tells us fasting and prayer, and he did it. He models it for us.